I think the development market would probably prefer consenting to be easier. The big hold up is the difficulty in consenting a new house.
Yeah.
What about, the flip side of it is if you make consent too easy, you create risk, right? Where's that middle
for the
ground?
last number of decades, it's been very difficult, and there's still been thousands of leaky buildings consented. So I don't think the tight rules have actually protected Auckland from bad projects. It's just made them more expensive, more difficult to start.
Welcome to Checks and Balances, brought to you by Partners Life. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And today we've got James Kellow, Director of New Zealand Mortgages and Securities, here to talk about the future of housing in New Zealand.
We're back in your life. James, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Nice.
So, James, we've got quite a bit to talk to you about in terms of the property market, but for the listeners that aren't familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Myself personally or the
Yeah,
business?
a little bit about you, a little bit about the business.
Well, it's probably more interesting to talk about the business. So it's New Zealand Mortgages and Securities. We're a medium to large scale development financier. So a non-bank, we say in many ways we're better than a bank. We've funded townhouses, subdivisions, hotels, apartments, commercial buildings, all around Auckland primarily.
Yep.
But also quite an exposure in Christchurch and a growing number of deals in Queenstown. Basically, where the houses are selling, we'll finance.
Nice.
And we're certainly down in Queenstown and it's popping off, so I'm sure there's some money to lend down that way.
Ton of activity.
Yeah, it seems to be selling well, which means there's market demand. A lot of it's to Australians, and they've got a thing called a self-managed super, SMS, I think they call it. So a lot of Australians, because their super contribution's 12%, I think is ours 3%.
Yeah.
Ours is 3%. So they've got and their wages are significantly higher than New Zealand to start with. So there's a lot of people walking around with a few $1 million in their superannuation scheme, which they can't touch. They drop it into the self-managed super. They can then buy an investment property in Queenstown, which will provide them a return, and also they've got somewhere to go and stay.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we were definitely having a few conversations about that when we were down there last week.
Yeah, how do you, when you think about Australians investing in Queenstown, how much of it do you think is the maths of this is a good investment, just opposed to rocking up to Queenstown and be like, wow, I just want an excuse to come down here?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not actually an expert on the Queenstown market. I've had a house there for a while, so I have an affinity to the area, but I'm not a real expert on the Australians.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine it will be a mixture.
Yeah.
You probably find with your own wife when you go traveling, you find a nice town, you settle in there, and you eventually find your way to a real estate agent's office and start fantasizing about having a property.
Yeah, that's where I grab a hand. It's like when you're walking past
just
the shops,
keep walking.
you grab a hand.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, this is nice. I'm like, no, this is strategy. Let's talk about, so you're lending out lots of money, James. What's the vibe like out in the market at the moment? When you're talking to developers, when you're talking to clients, when we're talking to consumers, mums and dads, it's hard, but there's hope it'll get better. You're dealing in a different part of town. What is the feeling like at the moment?
Well, it's probably actually the same part of town, because even a large-scale developer needs to talk to the mums and dads to buy the completed unit. So the mood's quite down in Auckland particularly. I think outside of Auckland, there seems to be a little bit more enthusiasm. I think Auckland's probably been affected more by the recession. People blame it on the last lockdown. I'm not sure if you could 100% blame it on that, but you just need to walk down Ponsonby Road and see the restaurants are not as full as they were. The tourists haven't come back. The cruise ships don't seem to have come back. It's a bit down currently. That does happen from time to time.
Yep.
Immigrants are still arriving, but an equal number of people are leaving. So there's not a growth, which probably takes a little bit of vibrancy out of the place. Each time an immigrant arrives, they'll want to buy a TV and a sofa and a new bed. So they do add something to the economy. It's not great, but I can see, the saying in property has been survived till 25.
Yep.
And I'll say late next year, we should be back to what I'd say is a more normal market.
Yeah, interesting. We're kind of we talk to a lot of people, obviously, on the podcast around their thoughts in the market, and I think it's going to be around 10% growth next year, because I think there's a lot of in the resi market, because a lot of people hanging back and not they're kind of waiting to do something. What do you think around that? Do you think it's going to be double digit? Do you think it might be a little bit slower than that to start off with?
Well, I would estimate the resi market dropped about 30% off its peak. So, and the way maths works, you need more than a 30% increase to get back to the 100% figure. So a 10%.
I don't like being reminded of that.
Yeah.
A 10% increase isn't actually that good, but that would probably be right.
Yeah.
So it's not. I don't look at it as growth. It's probably properties coming back towards replacement cost.
Yeah.
Because a lot of properties now would be selling below replacement cost.
Yeah.
So you're the lender, right? So you're the boss pretty much in terms of when developers are looking to do stuff, you're the one that they answer to.
Well, the developer's actually the boss because they do have options, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
I'd love it to be a monopoly, but unfortunately we have a few competitors.
Yeah.
Okay, but when your money's out and developers, I mean, there's a whole range of developers, just like kind of any industry, right? Been a tough time for them for the past couple of years. Well, if looking back over that period of time, how have they gone? How have they gone surviving in that market?
Well, I'd say some would be living off capital if they've had some good years and some good projects, and the smarter ones have reduced the scale of their business, reduced the size of their developments, just surviving really until sales pick up. And there's no point delivering 100 units when the market exists for 20.
Yeah.
You might as well cut the project into stages, just produce the 20. Don't carry a huge amount of interest cost on completed product.
Yeah.
So they've been just cutting their cloth to suit, really.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're seeing some changes from the government in terms of trying to stimulate, consents and build, the supply of houses. The first one that we saw them come out with was they're going to start underwriting some of the larger developments for pre-sales. What are your thoughts on that?
If I go back to on the consents, there's been this conflict. Basically, when a council hands out a resource consent, the planner looks at it as they've lost. So there's always been a mindset of the developer wants something, we want to stop them having it. And when they finally have to issue the consent, it's, we've lost. We could have got a level lower or a unit less or less car parks or whatever they want at the time, move the rubbish bins from this area to this area. So I think that attitude's slowly being wound out of the council, which is changes to the RMA will eventually complete that process. Now on the government underwrites, that will be, it's welcome because the sales have been slow. I'd imagine that's a continuation of some of the Kiwi Build money, and maybe reallocating some of those employees. I heard they had a conference call recently. It's about 900 houses they're looking at underwriting, which is a number.
Something.
It's something.
Yeah.
I think the development market would probably prefer consenting to be easier, and they can go and build something that the market wants, rather than still have it. The big hold up is the difficulty in consenting a new house.
Yeah.
What about, the flip side of it is if you make consent too easy, you create risk, right? And you create risk of, leaky homes or whatever it might be. Where do you think making it too easy, there's also some downside? Like where's that middle ground?
For the last number of decades, it's been very difficult, and there's still been thousands of leaky buildings consented. You only have to drive around Upper Nelson Street. There's been some not attractive developments consented. So I don't think the tight rules have actually protected Auckland from bad projects. It's just made them more expensive, more difficult to start.
Yeah, and the comment around, the developer versus the council and trying to get one less car park or one less floor or whatever it might be, if you're close to that environment in terms of development, that'll be no surprise. But for the average person that probably just thinks the council is incompetent because their rates are going up or whatever it might be, is that really what it's like? It's us versus them, and opposed to, because you think we're trying to build more houses, right? We want more people to have homes, less people in emergency accommodation. Has it really been like that for a long period of time?
Oh no, definitely. You go and try and build a small house in your back garden for your daughter or son or grandchild. It'd be almost impossible to consent that under current rules.
Yep.
Okay. And what about when it comes to like the quality of developers in New Zealand? What do you think about, the people responsible for providing new housing? Do you think we have good developers in New Zealand?
I mean, you can't criticize anybody who gets up in the morning, borrows a whole lot of money, creates something, and then has to go to the market and sell it and try and turn a dollar, or even get the original investment back. So they really do try.
Yeah.
And it's there's a lot of people on the outside knocking them, but you got to take your hat off someone who they employ a large number of people. They build something that is what the market wants. You could criticize them by saying there should be more marble on the facade to make it look prettier, but then people get upset because the houses are too expensive. So what they do, I mean, I'm in awe of some of the things that are created.
Yeah, because the obvious one that everyone sees in the media is Deval, right? And a fair bit of criticism dished out his way, and I guess it's almost that that perception of one bad apple, right? And I guess he's a little bit of a different case because some of the stuff he was doing.
I never had a business relationship with him, so I don't know. And it's sad that a lot of people invested money with him, but they've lost it. But the actual product, I've not heard anyone complain about it. It's I've not heard that it leaks. I'm sure there's a lot of people going home to bed at night in a warm room that was built to current code.
Yeah,
that might not be correct, because like I say, I haven't had a business relationship with them, so I don't know if the houses were built to code, but I presume they were.
Yeah.
The thing with Deval is, and those things are still getting worked through in terms of how it will play out, but the developer funds, right, and that money getting freezed up, and the stress that people had, maybe not understanding exactly what they were investing into, people in terms of the houses that they bought and still waiting for those houses.
The leaky tower.
I mean, I'm not defending that. Of course, sorry, there was a leaky tower.
And I think they had down in South Auckland, there was like gyms you had to pay for as part of the complex, which added quite a bit to the body core.
Yeah, but I mean that's the product, right? That's not whether or not it was delivered on time and was and
fine. He was quite a small scale developer, I think, at the end of the day. I saw in one of the marketing or one of the reports that he had $35 million of investor funds. That's almost a round of drinks in the financing industry. So it's not it was quite a small scale failure. But it is very sad for those $35 million of investors.
Yeah. And I do and the risk at the moment is, as interest rates start to come down for people in term deposits, they'll look around and go, well, I need to deploy my capital somewhere. And for those that understand developer funds, for those that invest into them, fill your boots if it's part of like a diversified portfolio. But some people look at 10% return and go, that's great, but need to understand the risk, right? And I do wonder with like that Deval investment fund in particular going, because you have to get signed up as a wholesale investor, right? And just making sure people understand.
We used to get asked all the time.
Yeah,
if we could sign people off as wholesale investors, and you look at them and you go, well, one, we're not doing it, and two, you're not a wholesale investor.
I'll say the weakness to the wholesale scheme is there's a $750,000 bright line to be a wholesale investor. So if Grandma came in with $751,000 and invested $750 of it, it's that would comply.
That's wholesale.
That's wholesale. So there needs to be some changes there.
Yeah,
but if someone's got $2 or $3 million of liquid assets, why shouldn't they be able to take some risk?
I mean, if you look at it from a private equity perspective, like you've got some cash and you're investing into it and you understand there's some higher risk and you're putting some money in whatever it might be, like in the scale of all the things available in the market. But for the average consumer who is thinking term deposits, residential property, diversified managed funds, it doesn't sit within that group. It sits for a different type of investor. Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below.
So James, as interest rates come down, there will be demand that will start to jump. There's obviously two pieces to the puzzle. There's the supply side. how are we going at the moment, in terms of, are we building enough houses as the market starts to get ready to move again?
Yeah, the housing crisis, I've never really agreed with that argument. I've always thought we had an affordability crisis, which is two-based, which is one's lower incomes in New Zealand compared to international, and secondly, high housing costs. Now, if they opened up the supply and allowed alternative building materials to be used, that would massively reduce the cost of housing and increase the supply. But if you had $1 million and you wanted to buy a house, you could go and trade me today. I'm sure there'd be 2,500 townhouses for sale, probably within an hour's drive of Auckland CBD. So there's no shortage of housing. It's an affordability crisis.
And you think that a lot of that is driven just simply by the fact that the build process itself is too complicated, just too much red tape to try and cut through. And then also the actual materials that are required, because there's not a lot of flexibility really in New Zealand compared to the rest of the world, drives that price up more.
Well, I mean, I feel mean picking on them, but let's look at gypboard, right?
Yep.
It'll be the lowest tech building material in the world. It's 2 pieces of paper and some gypsum ground up, stuck together. There's 2 suppliers. There must be 1,000 gypboard gypsum cement board manufacturers in the world, maybe thousands and thousands of them.
Yeah.
There's 2 who are certified to be used in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And why
And
is that?
there was one called Elephant Board that came in a little bit cheaper. Then they quickly figured out if they put their prices up to match the gypboard product, they'd make more money, and they've got a percentage of the market.
demand
And
will
Fletcher's
still be the
has a
same.
percentage of the market.
Why is that the case if there's thousands of these options and there's only 2
Do
players?
you think it's a hangover from the leaky building? Kind of, we want to control everything and keep it really tight, so the government's perceived that they're not going to end up with that
I
again?
think it'd be more that the bureaucrats who make the standards will have got a nice glossy brochure with a whole lot of detailed standards in them handed to them and told, make this the product for gypboard, and they just agreed with it. And if they go out there and certify another product, the 2 incumbents, I'm sure, will make a big noise about any weaknesses, or they criticize a lot of different ways, and a bureaucrat's not going to be rewarded for taking a risk.
Yeah.
So but that's just to pick on one thing. That's a tiny thing.
Yeah. Councils are not my specialty. There's a lot of things I don't know. God knows I haven't done any building with these supple finance hands. James, when it comes to, I just look at it and go, there's councils all across the country. There's a building code. How does it work in terms of councils? Can they approve additional gypboards themselves, or does it all come back to New Zealand?
I'm actually not an expert on this. I think it's brands. It's the national standard.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And if you so you're talking about cost in terms of councils, different sort of fabrics that would, make it cheaper. Any idea if we made these changes, how much money we might save in a $700,000 house?
Well, I mean, it'd surely be 30% you could pull out of it just to make the cost even slightly comparable to Australia.
Yeah.
And Australia with high unions, high wages, which I actually happen to agree with high wages. I think people should be paid well for an honest day's work. They're still significantly cheaper than New Zealand.
In terms of getting us out of the market, with the government's trying to streamline a bit of the process, chop out a bit of the red tape, and rightly wrongly, there's copping flack over here, and some people are kind of for it. As we get out of the kind of the housing crisis and we start to build more houses, what's the role you guys play in that?
Well, so we're a non-bank financier, so we can take more risk than a bank. A bank's a less expensive lender, and they definitely have a role to play. On a $100 million development, interest becomes quite a material cost. So, people will get the correct number of pre-sales, get the right construction contract for the right bonding, and go through the bank criteria. And the banks are excellent at that. But if you're doing 30 townhouses, it might be a $15 million build. It's not a huge period of time because they're built out of sticks, not concrete and steel. So you can put them up over 10 or 12 months. Maybe 15 months total period. The interest isn't as important. We can move much quicker. We may agree with the developer if they've sold 6 of them unconditionally, 10 conditionally. There's strong interest. We'll take a little bit of risk alongside them and get the project started earlier, which will get it finished earlier.
Yep.
And then things like subdivisions, where you've got a construction season starting 1st of October. You don't, 2 or 3 month delay in starting the project means you'll be then doing earthworks through winter if you can get the extension to your consent, dumping lime on the site to stabilise, which is hugely expensive. You might be better to start with us and move the diggers on 1st of October, first sunny day.
Yeah. And we've talked about pre-sales a couple of times during the podcast. What are pre-sales? Because not everyone's going to know. And why are they important for developers?
Why they're important for a developer is it proves the market.
Yeah.
So everybody can sit around, if they're an architect and a planner and a real estate agent, and decide that if we put 50 townhouses in this space that have got bedrooms downstairs and living upstairs with no car parks in half of them and car parks in the other half, that's exactly what the market wants, and these will sell like hotcakes. They go and build all the 50 townhouses, come to the end, people come along and say, no, in this area we really want a 3-bedroom house because it's close to a school, and that's more of a family market. So you get your planning, you market the units for sale, and sometimes through a development, the plan will change 2 or 3 times. You'll market the first bunch of studios, none of them sell, no market. Market some 2 bedrooms, some of those might sell. Market some 3 bedrooms, those sell. Yeah. So you mold the development into what the market actually wants. That's the benefit of a pre-sale. It's a test, because everyone can sit around and say, I'm an expert in this area. You'll be able to sell them. But until you've actually found a mum and dad or an investor or a first home buyer who's looked, because they are more knowledgeable than anybody. The 6-week period when someone's looking for a house, they know every house for sale in the market they're looking. And they come along to your one and say, right, that's exactly what I'm looking for. It's the right price, the right product, and the right place. Sign the contract and you're onto a winner.
Yeah, I like that kind of a different way of thinking about it, maybe from the average person, where you're testing the market to see if the product fits. Because quite often we talk about pre-sales and it's just, kind of takes the risk out of it for everyone because they're sold. Well, yeah, I mean, it does take the risk out of it a little bit, but actually at the end of the day, it's proving there is a demand for these things once we've tipped in all the capital and it's actually built.
James, in terms of your average client developer that you work with, what's kind of the blend in terms of how long they've been doing it, the types of developments they're doing?
We normally have 2 or 3 longer term customers who are doing more major scale developments, and then we'll have a dozen sort of medium scale who started small, and then we like to have 5 or 6 smaller guys who might have started on a half a dozen units, and then the next one we'll do for them might be 18 and then 50, and then we'll try and support them to get to a larger scale.
What would be a major development?
Like 100 is a nice number.
Yeah. Awesome. It's interesting that you kind of work with them over time as well, because we've got a lot of retail clients, a lot of doctors want to be developers. And it's really funny because we're always like, they're like, look, I've seen this block of land. My buddy said it's great. We want to chuck 8 townhouses on it. I'm like, 1, what do you know about building houses? And 2, you're a doctor. When are you going to do this?
I want to talk about this because this is a really good point. What do you think about those kind of people who have, their lawyers or their doctors or whatever, and then turn around and be like, property development mustn't be that hard. Yeah, there's good margins.
We've got to remember Elon Musk being an extreme example, but someone with an exceptional intellect, look how many businesses he can turn his mind to. So a doctor, but these are, you'll know the kids from school who became doctors. They have high intellect.
We bullied them for a reason.
It's the
get them while we could.
So of course they'll have the mental capacity, and maybe instead of watching TV at night, they'll be reading site notes and having Zoom project control group meetings. So they can definitely transfer their skills. It's just some good consultants and take some good advice. So you find a very smart person can transition, and as they say, if you want something done, you get a busy person to do it. They can always create the bandwidth.
I like that every time we now have one of these conversations, they're going to turn around and point to this podcast and like, well, actually, guys, we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that, James.
Yeah.
Awesome, James. Well, thank you for your time today. It's really good to get a different perspective on the market and what's happening. So thank you for joining us.
No worries. Thanks,
Cool.
guys.
All right. And much love to Partners Life for sponsoring this episode. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel, give us a review, give us a like, and we'll catch you next time.
Cheers.